Going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Marvetta Coleman. I'm with the Children Matter Action Fund. For those that may not be familiar with the Children Matter Action Fund, we were formed earlier this year to focus on helping citizens connect with lawmakers on critical issues across the state that impact children. We support the campaigns for Start Strong, Pennsylvania, for pre-K for PA, and for Childhood Begins at Home. These are statewide campaigns. This is the third of our candidates conversation in Southeast Pennsylvania. We are doing these across the state, doing approximately 13 of them across the state. So we are well on our way. We know that the issue of early learning education is important, not only to our candidates who are joining us this morning, but certainly to the many providers, to the parents, to all of those stakeholders in our audience that are joining us for this conversation this morning. So we certainly are asking that our candidates be knowledgeable in terms of the longer term lens that needs to happen with respect to preparation and the kinds of actions that need to be taken for early learning education and childcare. We do invite you to add questions in the audience to the chat box, which will be monitored, and those questions, as feasible, will be integrated into the conversation. We do want to let you know that all the candidates from Senate District 9, from House Districts 155, 160, 165, and 168 were invited to participate, but we also know that this is a very busy time, and certainly this environment that we are operating in makes it even makes it more busy or busier for our candidates. So we really appreciate those that have been able to join us this morning. We do plan to capture these conversations and add them to the Children Matter Action Fund YouTube channel, so stay tuned for that information, which we will send out links to make that available to you. In the meantime, please visit our Children Matter Action Fund website, and you will be able to see more information about the candidates and their views on early learning education. Survey and pledge that were distributed to all the House and Senate candidates, and so we certainly encourage you to take a look at that information. Our moderator this morning is none other than Cherry Gregg, known to so many of us for the outstanding work that she does in the community on issues impacting certainly issues such as what we're discussing today, education, social justice issues, and all kinds of issues that impact the community in her role as a community affairs reporter with KYW Radio. Her voice is one that is instantly recognizable to us, and so we are so pleased that she has chosen to share it with us this morning. As you all know, Cherry also has a program called Flashpoint, and I'm sure she'll do a little highlight of that prior to the end of our conversation today. So without any more conversation from me, Cherry, the program is yours. Good morning.
Good morning, Marvetta, and good morning to everybody who has gotten up and joined us for this important conversation. Thank you so much to the Children Matter Action Fund for organizing this. It's hard to campaign and educate voters during a pandemic, and it's so important that we get a chance to ask the tough questions of our elected leaders. People are paying attention to the national election, but our local elections are the ones that impact our lives every single day. And so we're going to have some comments. I'll tell you quickly how today is going to run, and then we'll jump right in. And we're going to talk to some of the leaders who are going to question our candidates, and then we'll hear from our candidates. And I want to just say thank you to the individuals who were able to make it here today, to State Senator Tom Killian from Senate District 9, to State Representative Danielle Otten, House District 155, Anton Andrew, House District 160, Craig Williams, House District 160, State Rep Jennifer O'Mara, House District 165, Robert Smythe, House District 165, State Representative Chris Quinn, House District 168, and Deborah Siamachi, House District 168. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule and being here today. I just want to say quickly that we have nearly 500,000 children across the Commonwealth that are facing barriers to education, right? And it's been underscored, and we've seen, all sorts of problems highlighted during this pandemic. The purpose of this conversation is to make sure that our children don't fall between the cracks, right? So now we'll get brief remarks from some of our leaders on the importance of the issue of early learning, education, and childcare. First up is Michael Rank, Chair of the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce. He's also President and CEO of the Community YMCA, of Eastern Delaware County. Mike, you're up.
Good morning and thank you. Thanks for this opportunity, and thank you to the Children's Action Fund and also to the candidates for being here and hearing our voices. Early childhood education is near and dear to the Y's heart. We care for multiple numbers of children, and especially during this time of COVID, it's been especially important for our families to get back to a somewhat normal position. It's also been very important for the kids, just for their social well-being and health and well-being. So I will leave it at that, and I look forward to hearing the comments and hearing your positions on early childhood education. One final thing, the earlier we start educating the children, the better it is for our society and the better opportunities they will have in life. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mike, for those comments. Next, we have Erin Wren, Director of Business Development at Today's Child Learning Centers. And yes, and I think Tana Reinhardt, Area Manager for Warwick Child Care Center, and they'll be sharing their remarks. Go right ahead. And you have to unmute, Tana.
Aaron, I'll go a while because I see you're trying to unmute. I'm Tana Reinhardt. I am the area manager for Warwick Child Care Center. I have been in with this company for over 28 years, and I've been in the field for a little bit longer than that. So I look forward to hearing your remarks because this birth to 5, the most important years. So.
Thanks, Tana, for jumping in there for me. I'm Erin Wren, Director of Operations and Business Development at Today's Child Learning Centers. I had a problem with my mouse, so I couldn't unmute. But I have been working at Today's Child for almost 10 years, and Today's Child has been in the early childhood education field for 30 years. So we are really looking forward to hearing the candidates' remarks and getting an understanding of what they feel is important for early childhood care centers.
Thank you so much, Erin and Tana, for those remarks. Now, due to a change in schedules, Senator Killian and Representative Quinn are unable to participate in the full conversation, but they have asked to provide a few remarks up front. So I want to give a couple minutes for brief remarks to State Senator Tom Killian from Senate District 9. You have the floor, sir.
Cherry, Senator Killian's having some technical difficulties getting on, so we'll have to come back to him as he gets on.
Got it. Well, State Representative Chris Quinn, are you here? If so.
The same for Representative Quinn. Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll move on and get started, and hopefully between questions, if they make it, we'll bring them back in the conversation. My apologies for that. So let me just give some quick ground rules to our candidates who are here. I'll pose questions to you. You get 90 seconds. We will be keeping time. Marvetta, wave your hand. She will give you a 30-second cue as well as a red card, I think. Is that correct? That means complete your sentence and move on. We have a lot of candidates and we want to cover as much ground as possible. So forgive me if I interrupt if you go over. We recommend that you put it in gallery view so you can see Marvetta and that our participants, attendees to the event use speaker view. And so first up, And again, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and folks will be monitoring that and will provide them to me, and we'll try to work them in. I'd like to introduce Erin Wren, bring you back in, Erin, from Director of Business Development at Today's Child Learning Center. She'll start us off with the first question. Erin, you have the floor.
Okay, so thank you again, candidates, for joining us today. Early childhood educators need all the support that we can get during this time period. Like I stated earlier, Today's Child Learning Centers has been in business for over 30 years. In March of this year, we had 15 locations serving over 1,200 infants through school-age children. At this time, we're currently operating 6 locations serving about 500 children. Our centers operate at the highest quality standards. We serve CCW-funded children, pre-K counts children, infant toddler contracted slot children, and we also participate in the Keystone Stars Quality Initiative. From our years of experience, we know that high quality early childhood education programs not only give parents the opportunity to go to work, but also give children the foundation upon which all later learning, behavior, health, and school success depends on. In the past 3 months, our operating costs have greatly increased while our revenue has decreased. COVID-19 has had a significant impact on early child care and education programs, and has also exposed the fragility of the child care system. While many programs have reopened, there are those that are closed and still others considering whether or not that they can remain open. Addressing the impact of COVID-19 on the infrastructure of early child care and education is critical to families, businesses, and the state's overall operations and economy as it relates to thousands of employees who depend on small businesses. So my question to the candidates is, what do you think is important to help families and young children to operate effectively in this environment?
Wonderful. I'll start with State Representative Danielle Otten, House District 155.
Thank you. I mean, I think that we're all in a moment where I actually just put my headphones on because I've got a first grader getting on a Zoom call for his encore class and a husband next to him getting on a conference call, and it's hard to hear in our house. So families are really, really in a moment of crisis in our Commonwealth for childcare options for their families. And so, you know, the first political thing I ever did was when I was a new mom and I was a working mom, and our school doesn't offer, it does not even offer full day kindergarten at this point. And so I really believe that we are at a moment where we have come to realize, if we hadn't already, that childcare is critical infrastructure for our economy. Our half of our workforce, whether that's mom or dad, whoever takes that responsibility for primary care of children, cannot participate fully in the workforce without the support of a good childcare infrastructure. And so I've always been a big believer in that. And I think hopefully more of my colleagues believe in that. And we need to make investments in early childhood care and education in every way that we can in the Commonwealth to support families and to support the economy.
Thank you so much, Rep. Otten. Next up is Anton Andrew, candidate for House District 160.
Thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak, if only briefly, because I'm one of those candidates who does have several events going on as we get closer to the election. But I wanted to be here, if only briefly, to speak to the fact that I am the child of working class immigrants. And there has been nothing that changed the trajectory of my family's life more than a solid educational infrastructure. My parents specifically moved to a school district in the United States from the Caribbean. That was their first point of emphasis in terms of where we were landing here. And that allowed me and my sister the opportunity to find meaningful work that supported ourselves and our family, as opposed to being supported by the government or other taxpayers. That said, early childhood education, there is no greater investment that we can make than in early childhood education and early childhood infrastructure. It not only feeds ravenous young minds, it feeds young bodies. The social services that come along with early childhood education and infrastructure basically allow and prepare our young people to be productive citizens. And I think what COVID-19 has emphasized for all of us as we see the fabric of our society starting to fray a little is just how much we rely upon our educational infrastructure. I don't think people realize just how much their lives were going to be impacted. It's not simply about getting your young person to school. It is about the freedom it allows you to pursue your career, as well as the freedom it allows them to have the opportunity to support themselves later. So I'm happy to be here. I apologize that I'm going to have to jump out of the meeting at this point, but just want to emphasize that I will always stand with this organization because I know from my personal experience just how much childhood education changes the course of not only my life, but my entire family's life. So thank you for the opportunity. And I look forward to being an advocate for you. I would refer anyone here to please visit my website, antonandrew.com, or visit my page on the website for this organization. Currently, I think it has my opponent's answers, but I think that's going to be updated very shortly. So I look forward to the opportunity to continue the conversation with you in the future.
And Anton, I would advise you to just put those links in the chat just to make it easy in
Okay,
case you missed
sure. Thank you.
you said. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here. All right. Next up is Craig Williams, candidate for House District 160.
Good morning, and thank you for having me in the forum today. The first thing I want to say also is, Anton, it's good to see you. We've been out on the campaign trail separately during the COVID crisis, and rare is it during this campaign that we actually get to see one another and interact, and I'm glad to see you today. I am a retired Marine Colonel, 28 years in the service and a combat veteran. Also a former federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice. And I raise that because I've had a number of childhood issues that I've come across, both as a prosecutor and as a victim witness, victim advocate. And so, you know, I see things through often that lens, but I'm also, like you, a parent with children in the house. Back in the spring, both my college student came home while I had a senior in high school in the house, then fifth grader, and then seventh grader. And like many of you, I'm sure it was chaotic, it was uncertain, it was difficult to keep the house moving. Jennifer and I both have full-time jobs, so I think many of us are feeling the pain of what it's like to try to continue in an education environment while maintaining our jobs. And I can't imagine how difficult it is if in addition to all that, you're financially struggling. And if in addition to that, you're the primary caregiver for your children. So I'm very proud to have taken the pledge for the Child Matter Action Fund. I feel very strongly that we've got to provide all the funding necessary to give these children and their families the advantages that many of us have had. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is State Representative Jennifer O'Mara, House District 165.
Thank you so much. It's great to see everyone on here this morning. So I am also a huge advocate of education from early ed through higher ed. And it's because a lot is driven by my family's experiences. When I was 13, my dad died by suicide, and my mom was now a single mom with 3 kids. And we moved to Delaware County for public schools, but my mom was unable to afford childcare. So at the young age of 14, I was the primary caregiver for my brothers after school until my mom got home from work. I got them off to school in the morning as well because she had to leave so early. And when I was 18, my mom had a baby and again, couldn't afford childcare in her limited budget and had to go back to work. And I was taking care of my infant brother at 3 weeks old. And so I understand that in order for our economy to function, we must have childcare up and running for families. And I think for us as legislators, some of the resources we need to evaluate are looking at the subsidies, especially as schools are hybrid and we have children who are in childcare centers for different amounts of time now. We also need to make sure childcare centers are getting the right resources for COVID. That includes PPE, that includes testing, getting them access to medical experts to help them evaluate their centers and making important infrastructure changes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. Next up, we have Robert Smythe, candidate for House District 165.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate it. This is definitely an issue that is very important to me. I've been a classroom educator for about 10 years now. I've actually taught every grade from K to 12, including kindergarten, which was one of the most difficult jobs that I've ever had to do, and also both one of the most rewarding jobs that I've ever had to do. One of the things that I think is interesting, just by nature of the points that a lot of folks have made so far today, is the frustration and the feeling of being overwhelmed that a lot of adults are feeling right now with having to work from home and at the same time cater to the needs of their children. And what I've learned as a classroom educator working in low income school districts for the last 10 years is that feeling that so many people are experiencing right now, that exists every day and has existed every day in all of our communities this entire time. Imagine, it's difficult to deal with as an adult when you're working and you have kids in the house learning. Imagine being a 10, 11, 12-year-old student and having to take care of your younger siblings because your parent is working and can't be home. And yet you're still expected to go to school, not be tired, not be hungry, and to be doing your homework and learning. These are fundamental problems. Yes, it's been exposed more by nature of the pandemic, and that's an issue. But they have existed this entire time. This isn't a new problem, and we need to do more to address it. So I'm glad to be here to talk about these solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Deborah Siamacha, House District 168, and I apologize if I said your name incorrectly.
Thank you so much, Cherry. I'm so thankful to be here today. I went to one of these forums earlier this year before the primary, and because of going to that forum, I was contacted by a daycare service, an early childcare education center, and I actually visited them right after they reopened because of this pandemic. And first of all, I got to say, I am so appreciative of all the work that they did and are continuing to do to get back to normal, whatever that may be in this time of COVID. And I think one of the things they really got to address here is that many of our child care centers are on the brink of going out of business right now. If you look at the statistics, 2 out of 5 child care centers in Pennsylvania are possibly, because they have so few cash reserves, on the brink of going out of business. And what will we do? I share the concerns of Representative Otten when she was talking about what this pandemic has done to child care centers. It has ripped a scab off of this fragile infrastructure and has revealed we are really in a tough situation here. And so I think Harrisburg's going to have to put money where their mouth is and step up to the plate and do something to help these people who are really on the verge of going out of business.
Thank you very much for those comments. I'm going to ask the next question, and you will have 90 seconds to answer. Using last fiscal year as our base, since it was pre-pandemic, approximately 32,000 children were enrolled in state-funded high-quality pre-K. However, that number stands in a stark contrast to the nearly 102,000 eligible children in rural, suburban, and urban communities without access to a high-quality, publicly funded program. What are your thoughts on the importance of high-quality pre-K for our children, and how can Pennsylvania significantly increase funding slots for families and these early learners? We're going to start with Craig Williams from House District 160.
Thank you. Yeah, in my opinion, you know, the elephant in the room here, of course, is entirely about funding. If we had unlimited resources, we would have everybody in the pre-K system and early education system, and we've got to do everything that we can to redirect those dollars to our children. They are the life force of our future. As somebody earlier said, their minds are just craving information from the earliest moments. And we've got to do what we can to get them into an education environment. It also ties back into the earlier question about how we're going to respond to this COVID crisis, because not only are businesses going under, but as Deb said, we've got early childhood education centers that are going under, and they need help. They need financial help, like many in the economy do. And that is probably the principal role of a legislator in these days, is to figure out how we're going to get adequate budgeting to all of these folks that need to get back on their feet. The families that need to get back to work are relying on early education for quality childcare. These children need to have quality programs. And as I said at the outset, all of that requires money, and that's the key role of the legislature right now.
Thank you very much. Next up, State Representative Jennifer O'Mara, House District 165.
Thank you for this question. I think it is critical that we at the state level make an investment in pre-K, because right now the system is unfair. We know that wealthy families have an easier time getting access to pre-K, and families who are already struggling economically are put in a tough position, like my own was. And so I think these pre-K investments are so critical. It will also help students in their long-term educational career to have quality education at a young age. We know that from data and research that we've done. And I think it's also pivotal that the state makes investments for pre-K, because then it will drive down costs. One of the biggest issues right now is that childcare is so unaffordable for working families. Even parents that have a 2-income household have a hard time affording childcare. And so I think it's critical that the state makes these investments. And one thing I want to note is education was funded this year, but we are facing a $5.5 billion budget deficit in November, and that budget deficit's not going to go away. And even if we roll it into next year's budget, it's still going to be there. We cannot let education suffer any cuts. And it is going to be critical that we, as the legislators in Harrisburg, fight really hard to make sure that doesn't happen. We've seen Pennsylvania's education system pay the price in the past when we faced a budget crisis in 2010. I'm sure everyone on this call is familiar, so we can't let that happen again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Next up, Robert Smythe, House District 165.
I think that it's pretty obvious how significant a role high quality pre-K plays in not just our society, but our economy, as noted by a number of the comments that we've had here. It's very much at the fabric of our success as a society and our success economically. And, you know, as referenced also previously, a lot of studies show that good high quality pre-K programs increase the likelihood of student success throughout their educational career. What I'd like to see is a severance tax that goes directly to education, not the general fund. These are the types of things that I think we need to explore at the state level as funding solutions to this issue, especially now, given the deficit that's also been highlighted. And when we do that, when we look at these solutions, I think it's really important that we make sure that that money, that those funds make it to the end of the line, that they get really where they need to be or where they're intended to be. And that's why I don't want to see those funds go to the general fund. You know, as a classroom educator, one of the frustrations that I have is a lot of time we talk about increasing funding and have these different programs, and yet working in the school districts that I've worked in, it's rare that I see the money get to the classroom that I'm in, that the change actually is affected and the solution is provided. And so it's about funding, but it's also about making sure that the solution that we're looking for is achieved, because this is that important.
Thank you very much. Our next person is Deborah Siamacha, House District 168. You have the floor.
So I failed to mention last time that that I was a teacher for 20 years at a very good school district in this state. And one of the things I saw was that you can't make up for kids who haven't gotten the education from the very start. And so we know that pre-K funding makes a difference. For every dollar that we invest, we get $3 to $10 back that we save later on in other investments that society would have to make. But Jen brings up a great question here. How are we going to come up with the money for this? And, you know, I really think that, you know, if it takes a village to raise our kids, it also takes a village to fund our kids. And we have to look at our budget and figure out where we're going to get the money for this. And truthfully, Pennsylvania has opted out of taxing many of our big corporations. We've got to hold their feet to the fire because these corporations are the ones who actually benefit from having really well-trained workers. And I was a manufacturing manager also at a company, local business. And you know what? I had a hard time finding people with the science and technology aptitude that I needed for the kind of jobs that they were doing. So, you know, let's step up to the plate. Let's not look to someone else. Let's fund our government properly, and let's put the burden on, at least for a fair share, for the corporations who actually are benefiting from this pre-K investment.
Thank you very much. Last but not least on this question, State Representative Danielle Otten from House District 155.
Thank you, Jerry. I have to echo Deb's sentiment about, you know, childcare, as I said, critical infrastructure. And if we create that hierarchy of critical infrastructure and where what is prioritized in the funding process, education surely should be at the top. And Pennsylvania has opted out of taxing large corporations, multi-state corporations, who are the beneficiaries of our public school system. And so we really do need to rethink our structures and how we build that infrastructure for revenue in the state. And, you know, things like severance taxes and gambling taxes and marijuana taxes, they're not sustainable. They're not sustainable. And the base funding for our education, we need a sustainable structure of investment. And so, you know, I think we just really are in a point in Pennsylvania where we have an opportunity to take a look at a long-term plan for sustainable income that is secure for our educational infrastructure in the long term. And that's what I believe we should be fighting for.
Thank you very much for those comments. Now we're going to hear from Tana Reinhardt, Area Manager for Warwick Child Care Center, who will ask our next question. Tana, you have the floor.
Good morning. Again, thank you for coming and answering questions. I have been in the childcare field, as I said, for 28 years. Warwick has been in Chester County, one of the high quality centers in Chester County for over 30 years. We were one of the first centers to earn Star 4 high quality ratings. So with that being said, prior to COVID pandemic, the need for high quality childcare outweighed the supply, with only 43% of licensed childcare capacity meeting the high quality standards. I know our tuition or our enrollment is significantly lower than it was prior to COVID. In addition, the number of childcare providers that has declined over the past 5 years. As you know, the state subsidy childcare program, Childcare Works, helps working families defray the cost of childcare, because unfortunately, high quality childcare is expensive. However, the state subsidy rates do not cover the full cost, the true cost of high quality care. What measures would you support to address this gap in payment and shortage of access to high quality childcare for working families, especially infants and toddlers?
All right, you each have 90 seconds to answer this, and we're going to start with State Representative Jennifer O'Mara from House District 165. You now have the floor.
Thank you. And it's a great point. We know that the cost of childcare for 2 children, if that was an infant and a 4-year-old, exceeds mortgage costs in 35 states and in Washington, D.C. So this system is not sustainable for working families. I believe we do need to adjust the subsidies. We need to make increases for working families so there's an actual equity in the cost and what we're providing. And I also think we have to address the fact during COVID, I had Zoom meetings with child care center owners from my district. And one of the things that they said they were struggling with is to use the PPP program, which some of them did qualify for. They felt it was unfair to take their workers off the unemployment system because with the additional $600, some of their workers were making more money. And so we need to address the fact that our childcare workers are not making enough, and we at the state level need to help childcare centers. If we increase minimum wage, we need to provide support from the state so those childcare centers can afford it. But we need to attract better people to work, not better people, but people to work there and give them an actual sustainable wage. So God forbid this happens in the future, you're not making more money on unemployment than you are in your job. And that was something that I heard from multiple childcare centers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Next up is Robert Smythe, candidate for House District 165.
Thank you. My concern with everything that's going on right now is that whenever we make it through this pandemic, that we will lose sight of this issue. And, again, in my experience, this is something that's taking place in every community, in every part of this state. One of the things that I've learned as a classroom educator is that a lot of times the students and the families that are struggling with childcare or have issues at home, they're very resilient. And so a lot of times it's difficult. People don't realize that someone may be having this issue in their community. They may actually be homeless, or their parents are both working and the kids are taking care of their younger siblings. This is an ongoing issue that requires long-term solutions. Like I talked about the severance tax going directly to education. Those are the types of things that we need to focus on. We need to realize that this isn't, COVID didn't create this issue. It certainly inflamed it and brought it to our attention and gave people a little taste of the average person of what this struggle is like. But this is something that a lot of our students live with every day. And it's extremely important that we don't lose sight of that and we work to resolve it. And we have to get creative with how we're going to address this issue. And I think improving the quality of childcare and pre-K across the state is significant so that all of our children have access to high quality pre-K.
Thank you very much. Our next person up is Deborah Siamacha, House District 168.
So I think a fundamental question here is, are we a family-friendly state government or are we not? Isn't it interesting that we always find money to subsidize big companies, for example, in fracking or in drilling or in gas production, but we can't find enough money to help our kids. We always pay a lot of lip service to it. But like I said, I've talked to our child care operators, our early education people. Like Representative O'Mara said, we are not paying enough money for these child care providers, and they can barely function. So, we can continue the lip service, but a lot of problems here can be solved by looking at our tax structure and restructuring who pays for what in Pennsylvania. And if we can find money for big companies, we can find money for the poorest among us to make sure that our kids are taken care of now and in the future after this COVID crisis is over. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next up is State Representative Danielle Otten from House District 155.
Thank you. I have to again echo my friends, Deb and Jen, and say that our teachers are not treated as critical infrastructure in this Commonwealth. Our teachers, our caregivers, people who work in long-term care are among the lowest paid, but most critical and most important people who work in our economy. And so in order to lift up our families, we need to lift up the people who support our families, right? And so we need to find a way to increase wages in this area. And again, we find the money when the stock market is hungry for an industry to perform in Pennsylvania. You know, we just recently passed HB 732, which was a $650 million giveaway to the oil and gas industry to attract more poisonous petrochemical plants to Pennsylvania. Last year, we gave another $50 million in subsidies to charter schools and to private schools through EITC vouchers. So we find it when it's important enough to people who are donating to politicians and legislators. And we can find it. We just have to get our priorities straight in Pennsylvania and also change our campaign finance laws. That would go a long way in getting our priorities straight in PA.
Thank you very much. Last but not least on this particular question, it's Craig Williams from House District 160.
Thank you. The one thing that I'm finding in this conversation, which is very heartening, is that this is a bipartisan issue, right? I don't hear any disagreement that this has to be one of the top priorities in our state. And I also want to echo this bipartisan sentiment that when you need to find funding for something, you can find it. I mean, that is the nature of this pandemic right now. The federal government is trying to put together stimulus bills. And I think that that's the charge for the candidates here, is to find this money, right? To bring it to early childhood education. It is putting children on the right path early on. As we say in my house, you have to learn how to school. Well, you learn how to school at a very early age in an environment where schooling is occurring. And this question is about making sure that we have the resources in place to have adequate pay and training for those teachers. And I would also note that 70% of Pennsylvania's children under the age of 6 have all of their parents in the workforce. So it's not only about education, it's about child care, so that we get our economy kickstarted again. Again, I think this is a bipartisan issue, and we need to go find the money.
Thank you very much. I want to read a couple of quick comments, and then we're going to do an audience question. Donna Cooper said, you all are doing a terrific job, and it's inspiring to hear how much you understand about the stresses in the early childhood system. Another Donna Bartman this time says, this narrative needs to change. We all understand the need for change. We need to act on it in Pennsylvania. And so let's go to one of our questions. We have Laverne, let me just, sorry about that. It moved up a little bit. Bradley Moore asks, and this is a 30-second answer, so it goes really fast. Should public school districts offer pre-K and other childhood education? And if so, should the state fund those programs in full? And I'll start with Robert Smythe from House District 165, 30 seconds.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, I believe that, based on everything that we've stated here, we all definitely agree the significance of how important this childcare and pre-K is. And as a classroom educator, I can tell you, I have seen firsthand the difference that these types of programs can make in the future sustainability and success of our children's educational careers. I do think it's that much of a priority, but I do think that it is a very complex issue to fund, and we need to take a look at the sustainability and make sure if we're going to do it, that it can be done.
Thank you very much. And again, the question, and I apologize for that, the question is, should school districts offer pre-K and other early childhood education? If so, should the state fund those programs? And we just heard from Robert Smythe. We'll go to Deborah Siamacha, House District 168.
I believe that nothing would do more to close the inequity gap between kids than pre-K, because the wealthy parents can afford it and they do it anyway, and the parents who aren't wealthy can't afford it. So if you want to close that gap between kids, fund pre-K and fund it tomorrow. And I think the state should.
Thank you so much. Next up is State Representative Danielle Otten, House District 155.
There is no greater investment that we can make than in our young children and a good start for them. And so, yes, I truly believe that we should fully fund pre-K and early childhood education through our public school system. And Governor Wolf actually proposed that in his budget address this year. Obviously, COVID has changed the game with that, but I think we have to cede no ground there. We need to keep pushing for that and ensure that all of our children get a good start in Pennsylvania, and their zip code is not the determining factor of their success in school.
Thank you so much. Next up is Craig Williams, House District 160.
Thank you. I absolutely support this. I think that, as others have said, that pre-K education is absolutely essential. And as I said earlier, you have to learn how to school, and the earlier you start that, the better. And to put that into our school districts threads back into an earlier question about raising pay for teachers. I think once you get it into the school district system, we have a better chance of raising both the training and the pay scales for those teachers in pre-K. As for funding, I think you put your dollars where it's needed most, and that's one of the ways in which you can close the education gap.
Thank you very much. And last but not least on this topic, State Representative Jennifer O'Mara.
Thank you. So while I do believe that we should make investments in pre-K, I just want to highlight we still don't have full day kindergarten in many school districts in Pennsylvania, including right here in my own school district. And families really struggle with finding something to do with their child for the other part of kindergarten. And so I think before we can get to funding pre-K, we have to fully fund full day kindergarten. And I also just want to highlight, while this is a bipartisan issue from our area, it truly is. Unfortunately, it's not in Harrisburg, and the majority party does not necessarily agree with us on, and even some of their own members, with these early education investments, or else we would have seen it happen already. And that's the unfortunate reality of why we're taking a long time to change in Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now go to our next question. It says, I'm sure you would agree that early care and education staff are essential. We've all heard you mention that they provide critical supports for families and children. However, the sector is plagued by low wages and, as a result, high turnover of staff. United Way of Pennsylvania found that the average compensation of childcare workers is $9.74 per hour. And Children Matter Action Fund partners know that providers lose staff to places like Target and even fast food chains. What are your ideas about how to adequately compensate and improve the retention of qualified professionals to educate children? And because of the time, I can only give you each 1 minute, but you guys have been killing it, so I know you got it. Deborah Siamacha, House District 168, you have the floor.
Okay, I actually have an idea about this. I've been talking about this on the campaign trail, and it's a service learning program. I think what we need to do is we need to give high school kids who are thinking about where to go to college the opportunity to earn dollars for college, right? By going to a program, let's say at Delaware County Community College, and earning a degree that, let's say, in early childhood education that would be fully funded by the state. And it's a fairly low-cost solution. And then afterwards, they would be required to work in Pennsylvania and give back to the state for a certain period of time. And it would be a win-win. You know, I know Representative O'Mara has talked about this issue of debt for college students, and it's really crushing right now. What better way, a win-win solution to get more people to go into this great field, raise wages because we professionalize the profession, and also make sure that our kids don't come out of college with unbelievable debt.
All right. Next up, we have State Representative Danielle Otten from House District 155. You have the floor and 1 minute.
Yeah, I mean, I love that idea from Deb. I think that any kind of program we can do to reduce student debt helps families to have lower overhead and be able to spend more of their income on the things that are essential to moving forward instead of paying for what they've already kind of consumed and done. And I believe that raising the wage in Pennsylvania has been one of the biggest fights Democrats have been taking on for years now, and it's something that it touches every single issue we are currently dealing with. It touches childcare, it touches long-term care, it touches the unemployment situation, and the fact that people are more secure in unemployment right now than they are going to work in some of our most critical sectors. And we need to treat these sectors as critical as they are. And that means having wages that reflect that. And so I think first step is obviously raising the wage. We also need to do things, as Deb mentioned, to help to incentivize people to go into this workforce and not have debt as a result.
Thank you very much. Craig Williams, House District 160.
Thank you. Yeah, and one of the things that I've been reading about is that when you put funding into training and education and getting degrees in the early childhood education arena, what quickly tends to happen is you lose your workforce to the school districts because they can pay more. And as a consequence of that, you're on a never-ending treadmill of trying to find more people for your workforce, which in turn probably suppresses wages and salaries because you're always looking for the next person. And I think what we need to do is try to figure out how we're going to incent them to stay. I like this idea of trying to help them with educational debt. I like the idea of when you're providing funding that it goes directly to the school rather than by way of the family, so that the school and the business itself can try to increase those livable wages for their teachers. At the end of the day, again, it's about money, and I think that that's an area where the state can be helpful.
Thank you very much. State Representative Jennifer O'Mara, you have the floor, from House District 165.
Thank you. And it's a great question. It's something I touched on earlier when I mentioned childcare centers were struggling taking their workers back into work. I think we have to just recognize that we haven't raised minimum wage in Pennsylvania since I was in high school, and it's longer than it may look. And when you make minimum wage is $7.25, most childcare workers make something between $9, $10 an hour. It's just not a livable wage. It's not sustainable, especially when we're asking these individuals to nurture and care for our children at the youngest of ages. It is the most critical time in a child's life, from the time they're born till 5 years old, and how they develop. And so I think we have to raise the minimum wage in Pennsylvania. It ultimately see wage increases for the workers that Rep. Otten has mentioned. And we also at the state can look at providing some supports to the centers to be able to afford this. This includes adjusting the subsidies like we've talked about, and maybe even setting up some sort of a grant program like has been done with hazard pay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last but not least on this topic is Robert Smythe, House District 165. You have the floor.
I agree with pretty much everything that everyone said to this point. I think we all understand how significant the funding issue and the pay issue is for individuals in this field. But one of the things I want to talk about is when we talk about education and the fact that there's, and I'm going to expand on this, a teacher shortage epidemic in this state. You know, when I came out of college as an educator, there were a lot of really fantastic people that came out of college to be teachers that I started out with or came out of college with from Westchester. A very small percentage of those folks are still in education today. I'm one of the last people I know. And it's not just about the money. That is a big part of the reason why people leave the field. But it's also about the way that we treat teachers and the freedom and support that we give them, or the lack thereof, to do their job. We need to take a look at why people aren't going into education anymore, young people. And we need to take a look at the reasons why people are leaving the field. It's not just money. We need to entice people into this very important career field, whether it's pre-K or K to 12, and understand that it's significant. And, you know, we need to bring people back into education.
Thank you very much for those comments. We only have a few more minutes in this discussion. I just want to read a couple comments. People said, yes, please see Teach Scholarship. It is a partnership with the centers that pay 95% of college tuition. That was Courtney Kimmel. Other folks are commenting about, you know, home care during the pandemic. So I encourage all of the candidates to check out the chat and feel free to respond to people directly. But I want to give each of you a minute to kind of give closing remarks. You know who's in the audience here. Make your final pitches, and at the end, when your time is up, pivot right to your website and feel free to leave that information in the chat so that people can be in contact with you. We'll start with State Representative Danielle Otten from House District 155. You have 1 minute, and when you see the red, give us your website. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here. This is one of the issues I care the most about. A lot of times when legislators come into the state house, when we have to rank the committee choices. Environment, if anyone knows me, environment was number 1, but my number 2 was children and youth, because I care a whole lot about children and youth issues, and really elevating this workforce, and again, making childcare critical infrastructure in Pennsylvania, and giving it all of the importance in our budgeting that it requires. And so grateful to be here. And thank you all for the work that you do to lift these issues up and create a public demand. And you can learn more about me and the issues I care about, my responses on issues you care about, at danielle4pa.com. Thanks so much to everyone, and thanks to all the candidates. 30 days to go.
All right, the countdown is on. Next up is Craig Williams, House District 160. You have the floor, 1 minute, and don't forget to add your website.
I was muted, sorry. Thank you, and thank you for having me today. This has been a very important forum for me. What I mentioned at the outset is that I am a father of 4. I'm in this race for my children and everyone's children, not only for education, but I felt that somebody needed to step forward and set a good example of what public service can look like, given the toxic environment right now. I want people to know that education for everyone, starting as early as possible, is extremely important to me. It has benefited my children, it has benefited me, and I believe that everyone deserves, as a matter of right, that opportunity, and I will do everything that I can to fight for that opportunity. My website is craigwilliamspa160.com, where you can find out about my background. And again, I have taken the pledge to support you, and I'm very proud to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up is State Representative Jennifer O'Mara from House District 165. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. And thank you for organizing this forum. I ended up in the state legislature because of the way education policy impacted my life. I already mentioned how we weren't able to afford early childhood care when I was young. And then when I was in college, we saw education get slashed. So when I graduated, I was a certified social studies teacher that was unable to find a job. So that's why I'm not in the education field. But I'm in Harrisburg now, working to improve the lives of working families by making investments in education. I fight for this all the time. It's why I've been endorsed by groups like PSEA and AFT and PFT, who recognize that we do need to make investments in education, and we need to change the people who have been making the decisions in Harrisburg, because for too long, this industry and the education industry has been ignored. And so I'm so grateful for all of you who care about this topic. If you want to learn more about other topics I care about, you can go to my website, which is www.voteomara.com. And thanks for everyone for joining us on this beautiful Friday.
Thank you for that. Robert Smythe, House District 165, you're up.
I want to thank everyone for participating and for allowing me to participate. I definitely agree with Representative O'Mara. You know, I too, when I got out of college, due to what was going on in the field of education, it was very difficult to find a job in teaching. There were jobs. There weren't a lot of jobs that were the attractive place to go in a lot of sense for a lot of folks. I ended up going to Chester and teaching for about 4 or 5 years. And one of the things that I learned there is that the hurdles that my students had a lot of times to their education was stuff that came from outside the classroom. I sat after school and tutored kids, and at the same time watched their younger siblings that they were responsible for. There were times where I did the laundry for a household of kids so that my student didn't have to, so he could study. So this is something, yes, the pandemic has brought these issues to light, but we can't lose sight of the fact that in every community, these issues have been going on for a number of years. And I'm fully supported, as I am now, as I have been throughout my career, to addressing these issues and helping the students in this state, not just in my district, achieve to the very best of their ability. So I thank everyone for the work that they're doing, and I look forward to the work that we're going to be doing. If you're interested in learning more about me, it's bobsmythe.com.
Thank you very much. And just as a reminder to our candidates, please put your contact and website in the chat. Last but not least, Deborah Siamacha, House District 168. You have 1 minute for closing remarks.
The only good thing that has come out of this COVID crisis that it has ripped a scab off of the inequities and the structural defects in our society. And, my whole life, I've seen the effects of bad or non-existent childcare. I was a Marine Corps officer, and I saw Marines who couldn't come to work because they didn't have childcare. I was a small business manager, and I saw the same thing for the 60 employees that I managed. And as a teacher, I saw the difference that early childhood education could make and pre-K could make in the students that I taught. But you know what? One of the things you got to look at here, this is an election. You invited us candidates to be here. Who's going to actually put their money where their mouth is, right? Let's look at these candidates, hold my feet to the fire. You can look at my website, I'll put it in here, but look at everyone and who's just going to say what you want to hear, and who is going to go up to Harrisburg and change things up there and do things like raise the minimum wage and make it so that these childcare workers can actually feed their own families. Thanks for having me here today. My name is Deb Siamacha, and my website is debsiamacha.com, and I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you so much, Deb, for that. And I want to say, you guys have to give it to you. You kept time. We appreciate you. We covered a lot of ground in just an hour. So we really appreciate your time talking about this very important issue. Thank you so much to Deborah Siamacha, to Robert Smythe, to State Representative Jennifer O'Mara, to Craig Williams, and to State Representative Danielle Otten. And I got to throw a comment from the folks. Lynn Hartle said, thank you for saying who will put their feet to the fire and actually come through with funding and resources as needed. And John Sperduto says, we've been talking about this for decades. I got to leave this message for y'all. Please don't forget us after the election. So those are the final comments from our folks. My name is Cherry Gregg. I am the community affairs reporter for KYW News Radio. You can check out Flashpoint 9:30 p.m. Saturday nights and 8:30 a.m. on Sunday mornings on 1060 a.m. on your radio dial. I'll hand it back over to Marvetta Coleman. And thank you again to Children Matter Action Fund for taking the initiative to have this important conversation. Marvetta, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Cherry. And I've got to echo Cherry's comments about how much we were able to cover in such a short period of time. I also have to acknowledge that Cherry is a big reason that we were able to do so. She does an excellent job in terms of keeping these conversations moving. This is the third one that she has moderated, and thank you so much, Cherry. We really appreciate the way that you have embraced this issue and have allowed us to bring it to the public through the voices and the vision and the sharing of our candidates, as well as thanking our other program participants, our providers, our representatives from the chambers. It's been a tremendous series here in Southeast Pennsylvania with the candidates conversations, and we are going to invite you to make sure that you go to the Children Matter Action Fund website to see some of the responses from those candidates who responded to the survey as well as the pledge. We know that there were a number of questions that were not able to be integrated into this conversation, but understand that every one of these candidates wants to hear from you. And because of that, we encourage you to contact their campaigns directly. Their information, if they have responded to the survey and the pledge, will be on our website, and you may contact their campaign office and ask them those questions, because that comment of holding the feet to the fire, it applies before you get in office. And then after you get in office, it applies from the standpoint of us making sure that did you do what you said you were going to do. With that, I just want to remind everyone that Children Matter Action Fund is a nonpartisan organization. And so we always make it a point to ask the candidates from all both sides in all of the races that we are extending invitations to with these candidates' conversations. Lastly, I want to make sure that I acknowledge our partners from PCCY and First Up. You have done a tremendous job with respect to the work that goes on. Folks see the front end of this, but the back end of the work is what happens before we can do what happens on the day of the candidates' conversation. So thank you to the team and the leadership at PCCY and at First Up. And as we get ready to go, I encourage you to make sure that not only that you are voting, but that you're reaching out to at least 5 to 10 other people. There are many options now. There are the mail-in option, there are the voter centers, and there is in-person voting. So everyone has an option for how they can cast their vote for this election. Want to thank you again from the Children Matter Action Fund, and have a great day, everyone. Have a great weekend and take care. Be safe, wear your mask.